I'm going to tell you something that will turn the stomach of anyone with a shred of decency. Hello, my name is Nella Grayson, and I'm 73 years old. People in my town know me as Miss Nella from the herbal stand, the older lady who smiles warmly, hands out free tea samples, and always has a bit of advice tucked in her apron. But that smile. It took me decades to rebuild. Most people see me now, standing strong, independent, healed, and think my life has always been peaceful. They couldn't be more wrong, because for nearly a decade, I lived through something so disturbing, so twisted, so humiliating, that I never thought I would breathe free air again, and the monster behind it. My own son, not a stranger, not a criminal from the streets. Not a man who broke into my house, my son who I raised alone, who I fed, clothed, protected, sacrificed everything for. Who I believed was the best part of me. I thought I had raised a decent man, but under my roof, right in the house, I worked my whole life to pay for. My son slowly turned into someone I didn't recognize. Someone who crossed boundaries, ignored my pleas, manipulated me, twisted my mind, and took advantage of my weakness in a way I still struggle to describe. But this part of the story isn't about the horrors yet. To understand how he gained control, you must understand how I lost mine. I spent 26 years working at a textile mill, sewing until my fingers locked at night. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I raised my son Daniel with everything I had, every extra shift, every scrap of overtime, every nickel of my tired hands. He wasn't a bad child. Quiet, soft-spoken, very attached to me. Maybe too attached, but back then I called it sweetness. When he turned 21, I had a stroke at work. It came out of nowhere, a flash of pain, the floor tilting, my body folding like wet cloth. By the time I woke up in the hospital, the entire left side of my body felt like stone. I couldn't lift my arm, couldn't stand on my leg, could barely hold a cup of water, and that's when Daniel said the words that sealed my fate. "Mom, don't worry. I'll take care of you, you can trust me." Oh, how I wish I had known what those words really meant, because the day I allowed him to become my caregiver was the day I unknowingly stepped into a prison built not of bricks, but of dependency. What Daniel did first wasn't physical at all, it was something far scarier. He made me doubt my own mind. When people hear that a life can change in a single moment, they think it's just a saying. But for me, it was literal. March 15th, 1999 started like any other Monday. I woke up at 5 a.m., cooked eggs with shakily steady hands, packed the same cheap lunch I'd taken to the textile mill for nearly 2 decades, and kissed my son on the forehead as he slept, pretending I didn't notice how cold he'd grown toward me lately. I didn't know that by the end of that day, I wouldn't walk into that house the same way again. In fact, I wouldn't walk at all at the sewing floor. The machines roared like usual. I remember adjusting a sleeve hem when suddenly, a blast of pain shot through my skull so violently it felt like the whole world ripped open. My vision collapsed into darkness. Women screamed, chairs scraped, someone yelled my name. But it sounded like it came from underwater, then nothing. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and bad news. A doctor stood near my bed, face heavy with sympathy. "You had a hemorrhagic stroke," he told me gently. "You're lucky to be alive, but the left side of your body is weakened. It may not fully recover." I tried to lift my arm. It didn't move. I tried again, harder still, nothing. A hollow terror settled in my gut. "Where's my son?" I whispered. "He's in the lobby." "He hasn't left since the ambulance brought you in." For a moment, that warmed me. At least he cared, or so I thought. But when he came in, something about his expression chilled me. Not fear, not sorrow, something else, possession. Like he had just inherited something. "Don't worry, Mom," he said softly, touching my hair in a way that didn't feel like comfort. "I'm gonna take care of everything now. You don't need anyone else." Just me. His voice was sweet, but too sweet, sweet like rotten fruit. The nurses praised him. "What a dedicated young man," they said. "You're lucky to have a son like that." But while they talked, I caught him glancing at me with an intensity that twisted my stomach. As if my paralysis was convenient. He stayed at my bedside for hours, too close, too eager, answering every question for me before I could even move my tongue properly. And every time he touched my bedding, tucked my hair, or adjusted my gown, I couldn't shake one terrifying thought. Something wasn't right. Something dark was waking up in him, and I was trapped, literally. Because I couldn't even lift my own hand to push him away. But the real nightmare didn't start in that hospital room. It began the moment he took me home and locked the door behind us. The factory floor was always loud, machines rattling, steam hissing, women shouting over the noise. But that morning, March 11th, felt strangely quiet. Maybe it was my nerves, maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was the universe giving me one last calm breath before ripping my life in half. I remember threading a needle, blinking to steady my focus. My hands had been shaking a lot that week. Stress does that to you. Years of overwork, raising a son alone, sleepless nights, worry, it all piles up inside the body until something snaps. The snap came fast. A piercing pain shot through the side of my head. It was so violent I thought someone had hit me with a metal bar. The world spun so hard the machines looked like they were melting. I grabbed the table, but the strength in my arm vanished like someone had unplugged my entire body. The last thing I heard was screaming, someone yelling my name, someone else shouting for help. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with wires everywhere. A nurse stood near me whispering into a radio. A doctor leaned over me, his eyes serious in a way that made my heart drop. "Ma'am, you've had a stroke." My throat closed. I tried to sit up, but my left side felt like dead weight. My arm wouldn't respond. My leg wouldn't move. Panic rose up so quickly I thought I would stop breathing. The doctor explained everything gently: blood vessel rupture, paralysis, long recovery, therapy. I heard the words, but none of them stayed. My mind was stuck on one thing. I can't move. My son arrived an hour later. He looked scared, genuinely scared, and for a moment, I believed I still had someone in this world who would protect me. He held my hand, promised everything would be okay, swore he'd never leave my side. "Mom, I'll take care of you, whatever you need." His voice cracked, tears streamed down his face. That should have comforted me. But there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before, a spark I couldn't name yet. Dependence does strange things to people. It shifts power, it exposes character. It awakens the monsters that were already sleeping inside them. I didn't know it then, but that moment, me lying helpless, him standing over me, was the exact second the balance of our lives changed. He left the room to talk to the doctor, and as the door closed, I felt a cold shiver run through my body. Not from the stroke, not from fear of the future, but from the feeling, deep, instinctive, impossible to explain, that something terrible was coming, something I wasn't ready for, something that would trap me for years. Because the first person I expected to save me became the one I needed saving from. When I returned home after the stroke, I still believed, truly believed, that my son was doing everything out of love. The doctors said I might experience confusion. They said I could mix memories. They said my brain would take time to settle. And oh, he used those words like weapons. At first, everything looked normal. He cooked for me, helped me sit up, checked my medication, adjusted my pillow. He spoke kindly, even sweetly, and he kept reminding me, "Mom, I'm all you've got. I'll never let anything bad happen to you." But then the tone changed. It always starts with tone. His voice got sharper, shorter, more irritated. He started sighing loudly whenever I asked for help, as if caring for me was a burden he didn't sign up for. He moved things around the house, but when I couldn't find them, he'd say, "You're confused again, Mom. The stroke is messing with your mind." When I knew something was missing, he insisted I misplaced it. When I felt someone had come into my room, he said I was imagining it. When I flinched at his sudden movements, he told me it was neurological fear response. Every doubt I had, he drowned under medical excuses. The worst part, he made me question my own memory. He wasn't angry the way abusive men usually are. He wasn't loud. He wasn't violent. He was calm, too calm. He used gentleness as a disguise. He told me I needed constant monitoring, so he began entering my room without knocking, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes after midnight. When I protested, he laughed, "Mom, you need supervision. I can't risk you falling." But I wasn't blind. I saw the way he looked at me, too long, too intent, too knowing. He would stand too close, stare too hard, linger too long. Something inside me twisted every time he walked in, a sense of danger I couldn't explain. But because I was partially paralyzed, dependent, and filled with doubt, I let it slide. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself trauma plays tricks on the mind, until the night he locked my bedroom door from the inside. I'll never forget the sound of that click behind him. That quiet, cold, metallic click that changed everything. I felt fear bloom in my chest, sharp and immediate. "Why did you lock the door?" I whispered. He smiled like he knew something I didn't. "Because you need privacy," he said softly. "And I need to make sure no one interrupts your care." That was the moment I realized I wasn't imagining anything. Nothing about this was love. Nothing about this was care. I was trapped with someone who wanted control, and he finally felt like he had it. But I had no idea how much darker it would get. Because the next morning, I found something hidden in his pocket that confirmed my worst fear. He wasn't just monitoring me. He was planning something far, far worse. The 9th year after my stroke felt like a long, gray hallway with no exit. Every morning was the same. He controlled my pills, my meals, my silence. Every night I prayed quietly, desperately, that someone, anyone, would notice something was wrong. But predators know how to make themselves look like saints. And he had built the reputation of the perfect caregiver so well that even I started doubting my own reality. But life has a strange way of letting the truth slip out, even when darkness tries to seal every crack. One afternoon, he stepped outside to run an errand. He rarely left me alone. He hated giving me even a sliver of privacy, but something urgent must have pulled him away. For once, the house was quiet. No footsteps, no eyes on me, no tension pushing on my chest. That's when I heard a soft knock. "Miss Bennett, it's me, Annie Johnson." Mrs. Johnson, the neighbor whose kitchen window faced ours. She hadn't seen me in months. He always told her I was resting or too tired for visitors. But she never believed him fully. She always looked past him toward the shadows inside our living room. searching for something she couldn't quite name. I tried to call out, but my voice barely whispered. Years of fear had trained my throat to stay silent, so I did the only thing I could. I knocked on the wall, 3 soft taps. She paused, then tapped back. "Are you okay?" she whispered through the door. I wanted to scream, "No, I'm not okay. I need help. Please, please don't leave me here." But the words wouldn't come out. My tongue felt thick, my brain foggy from whatever extra pills he gave me each morning. I tapped twice more. Mrs. Johnson pushed the door. It wasn't locked all the way. It cracked open just enough for her to see a sliver of my face. And in that sliver, she saw everything. My pale skin, my trembling hands, the deep worry in my eyes, the quiet desperation her breath caught. "Oh, honey, this ain't right." But before she could step inside, we heard his car pulling into the drive. Her eyes widened. She whispered, "I'm coming back, I promise." She slipped out quickly before he reached the porch. He entered the house moments later, scanning the room suspiciously. "Did someone come by?" I shook my head gently. I had to. Survival depended on it. But for the first time in years, something warm flickered inside my chest. Hope. Mrs. Johnson had seen me, really seen me. And once truth gets even a tiny foothold, it never lets go. Little did I know, she wasn't the only one who'd begun to notice. But the next person who stepped into my life didn't just notice, they changed everything. And their arrival started a war inside that house. Sarah's house had become the closest thing to freedom I'd felt in nearly a decade. But before that rescue happened, there was one night, one boiling, desperate, terrifying night that finally cracked the prison my son built around me. By then, the care he gave me had become a routine of humiliation and fear. Every day was the same sick cycle, controlling my food, controlling my medicine, isolating me, invading my privacy, forcing inspections and therapy that had nothing to do with my stroke. He had twisted the role of caregiver into something dark, something that left invisible bruises the world couldn't see. And yet I stayed silent because I couldn't move, because I couldn't escape. Because he convinced me no one would believe a woman whose speech shook and whose memory flickered like a weak bulb. One night, it must have been close to midnight, a storm rolled in. Thunder rattled the windows and shadows crawled across the walls. He came into my room without knocking, as always, but something about him was different. His voice was sharper, agitated, almost frantic. He accused me of staring at him wrong. He said I was ungrateful. He said I should understand the sacrifices he made. Not one word made sense. His anger wasn't new, but that night it burned hotter. I don't know what triggered him, alcohol, frustration, the storm shaking his nerves, but his mood snapped in a way that made my stomach twist. He grabbed my arm a little too hard while adjusting me. He hissed something I had heard too many times, "No one would believe you anyway." But this time, something inside me broke loose. Maybe it was the storm, maybe it was the years of fear boiling over. Or maybe God himself decided that enough was truly enough. From somewhere deep in my chest, someplace buried under 8 years of silence, I let out a scream, a real scream, raw, wild, animal. It ripped through the room, through the walls, through the years of hopelessness I'd swallowed just to survive. He slapped his hand over my mouth, hissing at me to shut up, but the thunder drowned him out. And just beyond the wall, a sound answered, a neighbor's voice, a woman calling out. "Is everything okay over there?" For the first time, he panicked, not me. He froze. He loosened his grip. He looked toward the window like a kid caught with stolen candy. I screamed again, louder, and this time I heard footsteps outside. A knock, a pounding, a voice demanding to be let in. It was the first knock of hope I'd heard in years, but what happened when that door opened would change everything. because the moment my neighbor forced her way inside, she saw something my son could never talk his way out of. The 8th year of my quiet suffering felt different. Not easier, just heavier, as if every day was another stone added to a pile on my chest. My son had grown bold, reckless, and cruel in ways I still struggle to understand. The care he claimed to give me had long twisted into something dark, something no mother should ever experience. And he hid it behind medical excuses, fake tenderness, and constant threats that no one would ever believe me. Isolation became his strongest weapon. He had convinced nearly everyone, neighbors, church members, even extended family, that I was too fragile for visitors, too confused to talk, too medicated to understand what was happening around me. He played the role of the devoted son so well that people believed him without question, but monsters forget something important. Walls have ears, and sometimes neighbors do too. It happened on a sweltering summer afternoon. The air felt thick, pressing against my lungs like a warning. My son had one of his usual outbursts, anger mixed with entitlement, after I begged him to leave me alone. For the first time in months, fear cracked through my numbness and I raised my voice. A scream I didn't know I still had tore out of me. It wasn't loud, but it carried everything, 8 years of pain, shame, terror, and a tiny spark of hope. Next door, Mrs. Caldwell, a retired nurse who usually worked the late shift, was homesick that day. She told me later she had been lying on her couch when she heard something that made her blood run cold. She said, "Sweetheart, that scream didn't sound like pain from paralysis. It sounded like someone begging from their soul." She rushed to my door. She knocked. He answered, pretending to be calm, dismissing everything with his practiced lies. "She's having one of her neurological episodes. She cries from the medication. Doctor said she needs rest." But Mrs. Caldwell wasn't just a neighbor. She was a nurse and a mother, and she pushed past him. When she saw me, my hair damp with sweat, my cheeks swollen, my eyes red and wide with silent pleading, her face changed. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the phone and called emergency services. I will never forget the moment she held my hand while we waited. Her thumb brushed over my knuckles gently, and she whispered, "You're safe now." I'm not leaving. She didn't know the full truth. She didn't know the years. She didn't know what he truly did. But she knew one thing: whatever was happening in that house wasn't care, it was cruelty, and that knowledge was my first lifeline. But what happened at the hospital, what the doctors found, that changed everything. Because for the first time in 8 long years, someone finally believed me. But little did I know, exposing his lies was the easy part. What came next was a battle I wasn't ready for, because even monsters can cry innocence, and the world loves a convincing liar. The day everything finally cracked open didn't look special at first. It started like every other day of that long, suffocating period. A quiet house, closed curtains, and a man pretending to be a caregiver while hiding the truth behind rehearsed smiles. But fate has a strange way of choosing its moments. My neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, a woman who normally left for work before sunrise, happened to be home sick that day. She spent the morning resting, listening to the usual sounds of our tiny street: dogs barking, cars rolling by, wind rattling the old fences. And then she heard me. Not a normal call, not a slip or a fall. Not the moans of a stroke patient, but a scream that came from a place deeper than pain, the kind of sound a human makes only when every layer of hope has been stripped away. She told me later. It wasn't just fear in that scream, it was a soul begging to be seen. She rushed to her porch, froze for a second, then hurried toward my front door. Junior opened it before she even knocked twice, calm, too calm, acting like the model son he presented to the world. "Everything's fine," he insisted. "She just had another nerve spasm, happens sometimes." But Mrs. Johnson wasn't like everyone else he fooled. She'd raised 3 boys, worked as a nurse for 30 years, and had a radar for lies sharper than any machine. "I want to see her," she said. He blocked the doorway. "No, she's resting." She stepped forward, voice steady. "Move." He wasn't used to people challenging him. That hesitation, that split second where his mask slipped, was all she needed. She pushed past him, stormed down the hallway, and found me. I still remember the look on her face when she saw me lying there, my breathing shaky, my voice nearly gone, my eyes begging for help in the only language I still had left. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Dear Lord, what has been happening here?" I wanted to speak, but my throat was thick with panic. All I could do was blink, hard, desperate, pleading blinks, trying to say, "Don't leave me." She didn't. Mrs. Johnson grabbed her phone, ignoring Junior's frantic excuses, and called 911. She stayed right beside me until paramedics arrived, holding my hand like she was anchoring me back to life. And as they lifted me onto the stretcher, I had no idea that this rescue would uncover truths far darker and far more shocking than anyone expected. But the hospital wasn't the end of my nightmare. It was only the beginning of exposing the monster who lived in my house. What happened next would shatter every lie he ever told. For 20 years, my life bloomed in ways I never thought possible. My little herb store became a local landmark. People came not only for remedies, but for comfort, for conversation, for healing. I had rebuilt a life that once felt shattered beyond recognition. Sarah was still with me, steady as ever, a blessing I never expected. Melissa and Dr. Harrison remained anchors in my recovery. And Anthony, well, he was the gentle surprise life had saved just for me. For the first time, I felt truly loved in a way that wasn't tied to pain or obligation. I had structure, peace, purpose, but most importantly, control. Control over my home, control over my days, control over my voice. Years passed like warm sunlight, quiet and safe, until one Thursday morning. I was arranging jars of chamomile when the door chimed. A voice, weak, scratchy, wavering, called out, "Ma'am, can you help me, please?" I turned and the world tilted. It was him, my son. But not the man who once towered over me and controlled my breath. What stood there was fragile, hunched, trembling. His clothes were stained, his hands shook, his eyes, once sharp and calculating, now looked hollow, almost lost. He leaned against the doorframe as if it was the only thing holding him upright. Mom, please," he said. I need help. I'm sick. I can't do anything alone." For the first time in decades, I looked at him without fear. "What happened to you?" I asked, my voice steady, almost cold. He wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve. "The doctor says it's a degenerative nerve disease. It's getting worse. I can't work. I can't cook. Some days I can't even button my shirt," he sniffled. "And I don't have anyone else." He slid one shaking hand forward, palm open like a child asking for forgiveness. "I know I wasn't a good son," he whispered. That's the understatement of the century. But please don't turn your back on me." I didn't speak right away, because there, in my doorway, stood the living embodiment of everything I survived, now needing the very mercy he never showed me. And guilt, pity, compassion, none of it came, only clarity. "You want the kind of care," I said quietly, "that you refuse to give me." He winced because he knew exactly what I meant. I stepped closer, leaving only a breath of space between us. "I survived you," I whispered, "and I won't let you pull me back into that darkness." His lips trembled. "Mom, please, I don't have anyone." "And whose fault is that?" He broke, "right there in my store," sobbing, messy, loud, desperate. But I didn't move toward him, not even 1 inch. Because healing means learning who deserves your compassion and who doesn't. He finally looked up with eyes that begged for an answer. "So what happens now?" I exhaled slowly. "What happens now," I said, "is something you never expected." His breath caught. He didn't know it yet, but my answer would change both our lives forever. But what did I tell him next? The words he never forgot. I watched him leave my shop that day, slow, trembling, leaning on a cane that shook more than his voice ever did. The same man who once held terrifying power over my life now struggled just to push the door open. Fate doesn't always shout, sometimes it whispers, and its whispers cut deeper than any punishment a judge could give. For a long moment I stood there frozen, not with fear this time, no, with something much heavier, much clearer, closure. That word tasted strange in my mouth, like something I wasn't sure I deserved, but it was mine now. I closed the store early that afternoon, sat behind my counter where I used to hide my trembling hands years ago. I remembered every night I spent in terror, every day I spent paralyzed physically and emotionally. I remembered the way he used to twist his voice into something soft to cover something dark, the way he'd say, "I'm here for your own good." But now I knew better. Abuse doesn't always scream. Sometimes it disguises itself as caregiving, control, boundaries, protection. Sometimes the person hurting you is the only one you think you can trust. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "You survived. You're free." A week later, I got news about him from someone who worked in the county care facility. They said he had been placed in a long-term ward with minimal support staff. They said he struggled daily, unable to do basic tasks, constantly frustrated, constantly alone. Not because people hated him, but because the system didn't have enough hands to help everyone. He was finally experiencing the same helplessness he once weaponized against me. Poetic, maybe, harsh, maybe, but justice isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's quiet, slow, inevitable. I didn't visit him, I didn't call. I didn't ask about him again. My life was finally mine. I focused on my work, my herbs, my customers, my Tuesday support group meetings. Women cried in my arms, women laughed in my kitchen. Women rebuilt themselves right in front of me. And every time someone thanked me for helping them escape a dark situation, I felt something rise inside me, a strength I never knew I had. I didn't become who I am despite what happened. I became who I am because I refused to let it define me. One evening, while closing the shop, I looked outside. The sunset over Savannah painted everything gold. For the first time in decades, I felt truly calm, safe, alive. But little did I know, just when you think life has given you every twist it can, there's always one last shadow waiting at the edge of the light. And that shadow, it stepped right back into my life the very next morning. Because someone unexpected showed up at my door, claiming they knew the real truth about my past.